Well, hey, welcome back to 316, a Bible study of Bridgeway Church out of the Tampa, Florida area. My name is Joel Eason. I serve as the senior pastor at Bridgeway, and we are very excited to be joined with you for this particular study. We find ourselves in 1 Corinthians, and we've been at this for, now this will be the 11th installment. We find ourselves at chapter 11. And I just want to give you a huge high five if you've been studying all along with us. And if you're just coming along for maybe one study, or possibly you've been kind of picking it up in pieces, that's cool too. We're just honored to be able to study along with you. If you're watching them live, great. If you're watching them at a later date, we're thrilled that you're connected here too, and that the Lord is using these to benefit you. Now, we're going to go ahead and jump straight over to our talk. I do want to give one little caveat. If you are a regular, you probably can tell that my voice sounds a little raspy. As I'm recording this, we're in March of 2026, and we've been having some high pollen, and as a result, some allergies have kind of flared up, and so I've been dealing with some congestion. So I just want you to know I'm doing the best I can, and I hope that this doesn't deter you with me being a bit raspy. So, hey, with that said, here's where we are, and just as giving an overview of the chapters of 1 Corinthians, you'll see some lines on the screen here. I showed this to you last week if you were with us for chapter 10. But those first four chapters kind of could be seen together. There really is a block there. Paul is introducing the letter, and he is talking to them about a variety of divisions that are going on in the church. And he is going to have some good things to say to this church, and he's going to have some difficult things to say to this church. But he's addressing the division straight out of the gate. Now, if you have been in study with us along the way, you'll recall that we've talked about 1 Corinthians can be studied with the advantage of what we've called 4 cameras. And the first camera would be the city and the culture of Corinth. And so we have leaned extensively, numerous weeks, on what Corinth was like, its relation to Athens. Remember that it is only about an hour's drive today, present day, only about an hour away. It's around 65 miles away from Athens. So it's deeply entrenched in Athenian culture, deeply entrenched in Greek culture. But it was also a Roman port city. And anytime you hear people say Greek and Roman, remember that the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great came first. So Hellenistic influence, that Greek influence, came before Roman Empire did. But then the Romans also brought with it a measure of not only order, but also some of its culture and some of its kind of nuances. And all of that is showing up there in Corinth, which is now a Roman port city that was part of Greece, that was highly influenced by both of these. So camera number 1 would be the city and the culture. Camera number 2 would be Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18 tells us that Paul was in Corinth for a period of 3 years. Now, we know he's going to be there more than one occasion, but his first coming into Corinth and his establishing of this particular church goes back to Acts chapter 18. If you also couple that with Acts chapter 17, Acts chapter 17 is where Paul is in Athens. So we watch him go from Athens then to Corinth. And so we can capture quite a bit of kind of the context in which he is writing here. We know that he is going to be in the town of Ephesus at a later date, and he's going to receive notification from a girl named Chloe, or from Chloe's household, it should say, that there's divisions, and that's what's going to bring about camera number 3, and or camera number 4. That would be the Corinthian letters. Camera number 3 for us was the letter that we call Romans, the book of Romans. And the reason that we've leaned into that at different times is because he writes Romans from the town of Corinth. And so we've leaned into these 4 different cameras. Well, I would just say here on that first block, chapters 1 through 4, once again, he's talking to them about why there's divisions. And he leans on the leaders. In chapter 2, he's talking about think about who you were when you were saved, when the Lord was gracious to you. Most of you weren't well-to-do. Most of you weren't high up. Now, he leans back in chapter 3, back on the divisions. Divisions being, some say I follow Apollos, some say I follow Cephas, some I follow Paul. That was very, very Athenian. That was very, very Greek concept to say the teacher that you most admired, the teacher that you followed. Paul is saying, we shouldn't be about this. We're about the Lord. And the Lord brings one to water, one to sow, but it's the Lord that makes things grow. So then in chapter 4, he had said, as leaders, we have to be servants. And he uses the Greek word huperetes, which was the term for in a vessel, a shipping vessel, the lowest level oarsmen, the bottom level oarsmen. Those were the huperetes. I often will say they were the first on the ship and the last off the ship. Excuse me. So he is saying that leaders within the church should be like the huperetes. We should be servants, not trying to be highly esteemed. And part of what happens is when you have divisions that come by way of pride, you get all kinds of sinful behavior. And so he talks to them about chapter 5, about an allowance that has happened of sinfulness that should have been called out. 6, that there are lawsuits that are going on, that there is sexual immorality going on, and none of that should be. In chapter 7, he's responding to some questions they had, and he says now about the matters that you've written me about. And one of the matters was about marriage. If you had an unbeliever and a believer, and they were at odds, should they stay together? What does an unmarried person do? What does a virgin who is unmarried? What does a divorced person do? What does a widow do? So there were a lot of questions, and Paul is answering those in chapter 7. Now, the reason that you'll see this block of chapter 8, 9, 10, and 11 is I really think that goes together. He is talking about making sure you take care of the whole, not personal liberty. And the way we've said it is team responsibility over team personal liberty. It's not so much about what you can get away with. It's about what is best for the whole. And so he'll say some things are acceptable, being that they're not illegal or not that they're criminal in any way, but he says they're not beneficial. He's leaning into that you really should assess what is the best for the whole. That will show up huge in this particular chapter of chapter 11 that we're looking at. Now, chapter 12, 13, and 14 are also a block, and we'll deal with those next week. But those 3 chapters can be seen on a block. So let me lean here, 8, 9, 10, and 11. 8, he had talked about food that was sacrificed to idols. And this is a disputable matter, but it had strong significance for the Jews and the Gentiles in Corinth. And I won't go back through unpacking all this. I'm just that's what he's leaning into, and making sure that you're taking care of one another. He's going to, in chapter 9, talk about the rights that he has as an apostle, yet he doesn't exercise them because he doesn't want to hinder anybody from receiving Christ. And he's calling everybody to have that same account, that same position. And sometimes people think that I'm doing good, I wouldn't fall, or I'm not in danger. And he uses chapter 10 to point to Israel. Israel was delivered from Egypt, and yet they still sinned and brought judgment upon themselves. And so he is calling them to take warning about their behaviors and to really turn to the Lord and walk in humility. So in chapter 11, he's going to continue this by talking about headship, and he's going to talk about the Lord's Supper. So last thing that I want to say is with chapter 10, he had finished with 3 tests. He had said, you should be able to ask yourself, does this honor the Lord? He says, do everything you're doing for the glory of God. In verse 32, does this cause my brother to stumble? He said, you don't want to cause anyone to stumble. And then thirdly, verse 33, he says, does this help win the lost? He had said it this way, for I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. These are just three fantastic tests for you and me to think about. Three tests that we could think about in any context. Does this honor the Lord? Does this cause my brother to stumble? Does this help bring anybody to the Lord? Verse 31, 32, and 33, such great framework for, should I do this? Should I not do this? Well, does it honor the Lord? Does it cause one of your brothers to be stumble or be hindered? And does it advance the kingdom of God? Such a fantastic way of thinking about the decisions and the personal liberties that we take. Well, from that, we're going to build into chapter 11. And in chapter 11, he says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Verse 2, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teachings just as I pass them on to you. Now pause there. So when you read scholarship and you study various commentaries and whatnot, or you listen to pastors talk about chapter 11, verse 1 and 1 and 2, but specifically 1, they'll often want to link it to chapter 10. And that can make sense, because so much, as you hopefully have seen from the whole ramp of chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, is about leaders and how do leaders example things? How does the body take care of one another? And just as he did in chapter 9, the rights that he could take as the apostle, but he doesn't. He's huperates, he's down on the bottom, and he's saying y'all should be like that as well. Not so much that you're the rug that everybody runs over, but you prefer your brother. Does this honor the Lord? Does it cause my brother to stumble? Does this help people come to know Christ? And he's saying, you should follow my example in all of these kinds of things. And for those that were holding on to this, he says, I commend you for it. Now, one of the interesting things is that you can commend somebody and then also have to chastise somebody. If you're a parent, you've done this. You commend your kids on one thing and then you have to chastise them on another. Let's say, for instance, your kid comes home with a report card. Back in the day when report cards would be paper and sent home with the kid for the parent to sign off on, and the parent opens the report card and you're like, okay, you got 3 A's and a C and 2 D's. Okay, I commend you for the 3 A's, but I have to chastise you for the 2 D's. Like, I can't not talk about both. I have to commend you, but I also have to chastise you. So that happens, like in work it happens. You might have an employee or an employer or a colleague that you work with, and they did one thing right, but one thing they missed, and you want to commend, but you also need to chastise. And that's what Paul is doing here. So he's going to commend some, but he's also going to chastise some. And so he says this in verse 3. He deals with something that has become highly controversial. He says, now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. So let's lean on that, because this sets some fabric for how he's going to close out this blog, okay? So I think, I'm just giving you my opinion, I think he is not talking about controversy, although modern day Christianity and modern day movements will make this controversial. I think he's talking about what is both biblical, historical, and was connected to their norms, okay? So the first part is that the head of every man is Christ. That's not controversial whatsoever. You have man, and the Lord is above man. Christ is the creator. John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning was God. And then it says in verse 3 that through him all things were made that have been made. So all things have been made by him. When we go back to the Genesis 1 record, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness covers this void, but the Spirit of God hovers upon the waters, and then God says, "Let there be light." Right, and then there's going to be in chapter 2, verse 7, there's going to be God breathing life into the nostrils of man. So Christ is the head of every man. Where the controversy here is around the head of the woman is man. Like, that didn't used to be controversial. It can be now. Paul is not writing when that's a controversial component. He's indicating what was common in culture and what was also historically timelined. That in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, the creation record is that God creates man and then woman is created afterwards. So the head of the woman is man, according to the creation narrative. And then you have the head of Christ as God. And some would push against this and say, does this show disparity in the Trinity? Well, not at all. So one of the things that we have in the context of the Gospels, we have this from the book of Hebrews. We also have it from Paul's letter with the church in Philippi, with Philippians chapter 2, is that Christ took on a servant's position. Philippians chapter 2, that being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or harnessed or held onto, rather made himself in the likeness of man, taking on the form of a servant. So he takes the position of servant, and so you see that he is under the Father in this regard. So you have in here the necessity of order, the necessity of yielding. And so he says here, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. Every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. So as we go forward, we're going to have to let some cultural mores come to play. The term more, as you know, is a custom, a natural custom within a particular culture. So you have here, he's talking about their public gatherings. And you'll see this as he continues to go. He's clearly talking about their public gatherings in Corinth. And he says, if a man in the public gatherings is going to pray or prophesy, and his head is covered, like with this hat, if his head is covered, he dishonors, is he saying he dishonors his head, or he dishonors the one who is above him? That's what he's indicating. So if he prays with his head covered, he dishonors his head, being the Lord. And every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her husband. And then he uses this line, it is just as though her head were shaved. So let's talk about that and then work backwards. So one of the common things in Corinth, in the ancient, you can do your own research and study on this, was that Corinth had a high volume of prostitutes around Corinth, and a very common way of keeping head for the female prostitutes was to have their heads shaved. So let me just go to a look here. I've showed this to you along the way. So this is in Corinth. This is the Corinth that Paul was in. The hill in the back is referred to as the Acro Corinth. Acro coming from high place, the high place of Corinth. And where you see these 6 pillars that are still standing, that was in the Agora. That was a temple to Apollo. On the hill in the back at the Acro Corinth, there was a temple up there to Aphrodite. And there would be prostitutes at both, but the one at the Acro Corinth, back on the hill, was the most prominent one. And history records numerous sources that at the Acro Corinth, there would be up to 1,000 prostitutes, male and female. And they integrated sex as part of their worship. And there was also commerce up there. There was economy. There was banking often within these temples. Like if you take Ephesus and the Temple of Diana, or often called Artemis, there was a literal bank in the temple where money exchange and paying for sacrifices. I've also talked about the food sacrificed to idols, that there was butcher shops connected to the temples because they would have sacrifices and then the meat would be sold. There was a lot of activity that happened back up on that hill. It's where a lot of the iniquity, a lot of immorality spilled down into Corinth. Well, I say that because you would have prostitutes that would then come down into the town in the evening when everything was done, so to say, when shop was closed, let's say, and many, very commonly, had their head shaved. So he's being quite sarcastic here. If I come back now to our verse, if he's being quite sarcastic, every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her husband. And it's almost like she were one of the prostitutes. So he's not calling Christian women who don't have their head covered prostitutes. What he is saying is there's a high degree of dishonor that is possible here. So one of the things that we've got to keep in mind, I think it's incredibly helpful for, is this is in a time period, whether we want to believe this or not, it's just factual to history. This was a time period in which Christianity was the most inclusive community of people on planet Earth. It was the group that took in widows. It was the group that took in orphans. It was the group that took in the sick. It was the group that took in babies. It was the group that esteemed and gave rights to women. The Church of Jesus Christ in antiquity was the most inclusive group on planet Earth. Now, here's something to consider, though. Often that would also bring about several misguided liberties. So I'm going to just read a quote to you. There's a quote that I think is a great quote. A new movement is most often hindered by its disciples, not by its enemies. Let me read that again. A new movement is most often hindered by its disciples and not its enemies. When you have a young movement, often the misguided liberties that those that are within it take often are more damaging than the opponents on the outside. Well, one of the things that's happening in Corinth is a lot of the division and the complications happening from within, not just from without. It's not so much opponents on the outside, it's misguided liberties, it's misguided sinfulness on the inside. So Paul is having to address quite a bit of that. And so here, when he's talking to the man, he says, if every man who prays with his head covered. Now let's lean on that. It's important that we understand that this church in Corinth had Jew and Gentile within it, right? And so there's Gentile mores, but there's also Jewish mores. What were customs? So I'm going to take my hat off for just a second. And let's say, for instance, one of these, a kippah or a yarmulke. So if you and I went to Israel, we would find that people would put one of these on their head and they would pray with these, right? This would be like the covering. And you can see it up there. And this would be the idea that I pray covered. Now, Paul says here, if every man who prays with his head covered, he dishonors his head. Why is he saying that? Well, one of the things you have to understand about these is these were not biblically instructed. You won't find this biblically instructed in the law of Moses. You won't find it in the Old Testament. These came about in what is called the Talmudic era. The Talmud was an accompanying commentary to how the law of Moses and how the practice of Judaism was to be carried out. So you'll read about the Talmud, Talmud. Well, the Talmudic era talked about covering of the head. And it's going back to when Moses would pray with a veil, or he would cover his face from the radiance of the Lord. And so there are a couple of times where you'll see Moses with a veil, and it's coming from that period. But it was not in the law of Moses. It was not within instruction. So if this is more connected, not so much to the law of Moses, but to the traditions in the Talmudic era of how do we carry that out, then this is very much connected to Judaism. Now, Paul's not an opponent of Judaism. He's not trying to take all things Jewish down by any means, but he is very clear and unapologetic. We've been set free to Christ. So for a Jewish man who returns to this, he's indicating if you feel that this is what makes you right with God, then you're dishonoring to the one who is your true head, the Lord. Is he making a fight against anybody who prays with a hat on? No, that's not what he's pushing on here. What he is pushing on is feeling, resisting, or not appreciating, not recognizing that you've been set free in Christ. Okay? So for the woman then, for her head to be uncovered, this is a bit complicated as well, because in chapter 7, he dealt with women that were unmarried. He deals with virgins who had not been married. He deals with those who were divorced and unmarried. He deals with widows. So is this indicating that just a woman has to cover her head, but what if she doesn't have a husband? Once again, he's bringing just simple order. Is this to say that a woman today is in dishonoring of the Lord if she has her head uncovered? It's not what it's indicating. He is bringing a measure of order from both Gentile and Jewish mores, and understanding that not only are they in Christ, but there should be a measure of honor and submission amongst one another for the whole. So he says this: if a woman does not cover her head, she should shave her hair. She should have her hair cut off. He's using sarcasm, as Paul often does. Does he want a woman who prays and prophesies to act and behave like a prostitute coming down off of the Acrocorinth? Absolutely not. He's using sarcasm to recognize that the woman of the Lord should be different. The man of the Lord should be different. And if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut or shaved off, she should cover her head. So he is not being duplicitous here. He's not saying in one regard, she should shave it. Oh, but if she's, disgraced by that, she should cover her head. Let me give you a scenario that has nothing to do with this. Let's say, for instance, if you're a parent. If you're a parent and you were to have your kids bowing up against you, your kid gets sassy, and I can't wait to move out of this place, and I'll make my own rules, and I'll do my own stuff. And the parent will say to the kid, well, if you want to be in charge, then you go ahead and move on out. But then the parent will also follow up. If you move out, you're off my dime. I'm not paying your bills. I'm not taking care of all those things. If you want to be in charge, fine, move on out. But when you get out there, don't ask me to come paying your bills. It's like this two-sided thing. Paul's doing something very similar here in relation to the ladies. He's talking to them about, if you want to have liberties, but you're going to be dishonoring, you can't get away with that. You can't be dishonoring to the whole. You can't be dishonoring to men. You can't be dishonoring to the male. And he's not just pointing at women. He's certainly going to point at guys here that men can't be dishonoring. The church should respond in ways of modesty. The church should respond in ways of decency and honor towards one another. Remember how chapter 10 finished. Does this honor the Lord? Does this cause my brother to stumble? Does this bring people to Christ? So head covering for them was involved with some of that.
So he says for verse 7, a man ought not to cover his head. And this is why often, you'll have churches that won't let men have a hat on in church. And I'm not pushing for or against hats. I'm not a church that says men can't wear a hat in the auditorium or within the church. I have no problem with that. If they allow it, I have no problem with that. But this verse 7 is where a lot of that would originate from. He says in verse 8, for man did not come from women, but women from man. Excuse me. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. Now, please hear me on this, because he's going to go in a whole different direction in just a second. That's going to sound almost contradictory to this. What he is saying here with that last verse 8 and verse 9, he's just giving the indication of headship going back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. He's saying the order was God, then man, then woman. So everybody needs to be mindful that they are in submission to someone. And they need to be mindful of a yieldedness. There needs to be a softness in the people of God. And so then he goes into a verse that has a lot of, uncertainty around it. So I'll give you some thoughts around it. It says, for this reason, like coming off of that, he says, for this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. Now, what does that mean? For this reason, and because of the angels. So I'm just going to give you what are some theories. So I'm not going to tell you which is right. And maybe none of these theories are correct. I don't really understand it. I don't know what Paul is referring to. And scholarship that says exactly what he's referring to, it's a guess. There are theories about what he's intending. Here are some of the theories from ancient Jewish traditions. Number one, it is often held and taught amongst Jewish tradition that the angels fell because of the beauty of women. And that's coming from Genesis chapter 6. So is Paul referring to in verse 10 fallen angels and the influence of women being fair and beautiful in the sight of angels. Some say that that might be what he's leaning on. Another theory is that angels cover themselves in God's glory. So just as angels, according to Isaiah chapter 6, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And then he begins to describe the glory of angelic presence that he sees. And you have angels that cover, and so it could be that he's referring to, if angels in the presence of God cover, then so too should we be. That could be what he's referring to. And then some hold that it could just be number 3, that angels are present amidst people's worship of God. That it's not just, the band up on the stage and you and me singing in seats out in the auditorium or sanctuary. Or that if you're in your car and you're just worshiping to Brandon Lake or Elevation or Hillsong or whoever you listen to when you sing songs of worship to the Lord, that it many times is that the angels are present in the midst of that. And that may be true too. That may be what he's referring to. I'm just telling you there are different theories about what he is referring to with this line of verse 10. I'll leave that to you to wrestle with and, come up with your own conclusions. But he says in verse 11, in the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. So like earlier there in verse 8 and verse 9, he had this creation order where, hey, it was man then woman. But here he's saying, but let's be clear, men, you're not independent of woman. Outside of Adam, none of you came about outside of a woman. So there's this interconnectedness. Now this pulls into some things that Paul has talked about in other of his writings, that there's neither Jew nor Gentile, there's neither male nor female. He's going to say that in the letter to the churches in Galatia. And he's talking about Gentile, Jew, man, woman, all saved before the Lord in the same account. he says for verse 12, for as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman, but everything comes from God. So in no regards is there ever kind of this, I'm independent and we're better. Like that, to me, if I'm just honest, it's a bit nauseating. It gets so tired. It's so exhausting to hear that, better than kind of language, better than kind of positioning. Everybody has assignments in the Lord. Everybody has different callings. Everybody has different, let's call it, roles in the Lord. But no one's independent on your own. We're all under submission. We all should be looking out for the betterment of the whole. If you're a leader, you try and serve, you say, my example of leadership is Christ, and he died for people. He served people. And Jesus says, if you want to be exalted, you're going to be really, really humbled. But if you'll humble yourself, then the Lord will use you in powerful ways. So there's not to be any of this posturing, I'm the man. And there doesn't have to be this female empowerment fighting against men. That's not what the scriptures are calling us to. The scriptures are calling us to this really beautiful serving of one another before the Lord. And so he continues on here and says, judge for yourselves. And apparently hair and coverings was a moray still that impacted all that. So he says, judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not, and then he says, does not the very nature of things, like natural biology, teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him, but that if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? For long hair is given to her as a covering. So the leaning here is a bit of a twisted knot. So he says the very nature of things. He's talking about, does not the biology of things appear to point to this? So if you have 100 men and you have 100 ladies, you're going to have, in most cultures, most mores, you're going to have that the female hair length is going to be a bit longer than males, even when males try and grow out their hair. And I'm going to show you a photo when I had long hair, because I had long hair before we ever, started the church as a youth pastor. I had long hair. And, but it's not always the context. Not every culture. There's numerous tribes, numerous locations in Africa and different parts of the world that long hair is not a staple at all. And you would say of Paul even had a point that he had hair that had to be cut. So once again, our camera number 2, Acts 18, Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sisters and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Cenchrea because of a vow he had taken. So he's in Corinth. We know he was in Corinth for 18 months, the very place that we're talking to, the very place that he writes his letter. And while there, he had grown his hair out. Now I'll show you where you see he has his hair cut off at Cenchrea. So let me show you the Diolkos. Once again, this is that isthmus. This is Corinth that you're looking at, that isthmus. And you'll see one body of water and then another body of water. If you look at the body of water on this screen, if you look at the body of water directly above my head and go like to the edge of the screen where you're almost going off the screen, that would be that body of water, that harbor would be where Cenchrea is. So Paul is leaving Corinth and he is about to sail across the Aegean Sea. He's going to be headed eventually to Ephesus and then ultimately to Syria. And there he has his hair cut off. So you have this Acts 18:18. Now, I said I'd show a photo with me with long hair. So I don't have tons of photos, but so my hair used to be, I could grab it, I could grab it back here. I grew it out really long during college and whatnot, got married with long hair. I had one person one time, according to this verse, who tried to convince me how much I was in sin for having long hair. And, it's like, you're ridiculous. This is not what Paul is pointing to. He's talking about the order of watching out for one another, for protecting, for order within the church, for men having positions, for women having positions, and that the church can be healthy and not a stumbling block to one another. So he says in verse 16, if anyone wants to be contentious about that, and a lot of people do, a lot of people want to be contentious about this kind of stuff. He says, we have no other practices, nor do the churches of God. Like, you will have people that will take that one verse or two verse and they will land and they will fight you tooth and nail on things without understanding, A, the full body of context, B, what Paul comes off of it and says, if you want to be contentious about it, that's on your own terms, but I don't have anything else to tell you is what he's saying. There are things that are, the way we will word it around here is there are things that are in a closed hand and there are things that are in an open hand. Open hand are the things that we're going to have disagreements about and we're going to be gracious to. We're going to see eschatology different. You think the Lord's coming here, another person thinks the Lord's coming there. Closed hand, it's going to be about that we are saved by faith alone. In Christ, his work, not by our works of righteousness, so that nobody can boast. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, 9, and 10. We're created by him for good works in him only, but we're not saved by those works, according to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. Closed hand, the inerrancy of the scripture. Our whole series, 3:16, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, all scripture is God-breathed, and it is profitable or useful for teaching, correcting, training in righteousness, that we might be thoroughly equipped for every good work. That the word of God is his word, not just good things and not something with errors. So close hand and open hand. Paul clearly is leaning here. If you want to be contentious about this, I have nothing to tell you. And he says here in verse 17, in the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. Now, I love where he goes with this. I will tell you, he's going to the Lord's Supper, but he's going to go into something that was very much practiced back then, that is not practiced today. And I'll point to it. But watch that combination, once again, of 16 and 17. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, I have no words for him. But in the following directives, what I'm about to tell you, like what was an open hand and what's a closed hand, I have no praise for you, because your meetings, it's turning out when you guys get together, your gatherings, they're doing more harm than good. So what is he talking about here? They're gatherings that he's going to talk about. He is going to talk about the Last Supper, the communion, when they share in communion together. But there's something important to understand. He's referring to the breaking of bread, and it was called a love feast. The love feast was this, agape, the word agape for love, an agape feast. So it says in Acts chapter 2, verse 46, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, that's public, and they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. That's private. So they met in the temple and they met in homes. That's Acts 2. That's in Jerusalem. As the church continued to expand into Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 5, and beyond that, you will watch this continuation of these, the church gathering, and there being these home meetings, so to say. So we read in Acts chapter 4 how the church continued to meet together. So watch this as we go into 1 Corinthians. It says, in the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you. And to some extent, I believe it. Like I believe the report of the divisions. That's why I'm writing this letter to you. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. Now pause this. Let me take one concept, put it to the side here. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. my opinion on this, and if you have a different opinion, that's fine, no problem. But I've read different commentaries, different theories around this verse. My opinion on it is this, that there are societal divisions and differences that often will reveal your measure of character and whether you are following the Lord in the fullness. Let me lean onto camera number one. Camera number one is Corinth. You saw the Diolchus. You remember, hopefully, that ships would be come into one side from the west. They would be unloaded. They would be carted across that isthmus because of how much easier it was than trying to sail around Achaia, which was treacherous for sailors. They would be carted across that isthmus and then loaded back up. The high population, I talked about this in chapter 1, the high population of Corinth were slaves. The high population of Corinth were not owners and were not Roman citizens. So in Corinth, you very, very, very much had societal differences. You had wealthy and you had most that were poor. You had owners and you had most that were slaves who had their employment with another. You had a variety of differences. No doubt there have to be differences among you, and that will really put on display kind of true character you have, whether you're trying to be upper echelon or whether you're willing to serve the whole. So watch that concept show up in how they do communion and their agape feasts. When you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat, for as you eat, each of you goes ahead without waiting for anybody else. One remains hungry and another gets drunk. Like, pause there for a second. Like, let's talk about this agape feast. So they would have times that they would have all church together. Remember, the church was the most inclusive group. So you have in-church gatherings, home gatherings of Christian community where you have owner and slave who are on the same level before Christ. Once they leave that home, societal difference, but inside, I mean, imagine that you're the boss and you have people you employ, and there are certain environments you go and we're all one, we're all the same, but when we come to work, very different. You could have a coach of a team and players, and there's a difference, but then when you go to, let's say, church and we worship, all the same, but when we come back to the field, there's a difference, societal difference. He says, it's not really the Lord's Supper you eat, because what's happening is you guys aren't even waiting. Most of the slaves in Corinth worked full days. They worked most days, if not all days. So let's just imagine your agape feast in Corinth was going to happen, let's say, at 8 p.m. And let's say the wealthy were getting to the home at 4 p.m. and they decided to start eating. And they decided to start fellowshipping. And they decided to go ahead and start drinking a glass of wine, and then a second glass of wine. And this was at 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. And they said their prayers to the Lord. And they said their body and blood and all the communion components. By the time it gets to 8 p.m., they're fat, fed, ready for bed. Some of them are even drunk. And now the poor are arriving. The poor who have no monetary means for providing any food at the agape feast, but they're showing up and there's no food, and some are drunk, and everything's already happened. And Paul is saying this is absolutely wrong, that you simply couldn't wait. You couldn't prefer your brother. Like, once again, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11. What do you have personal liberty for, and what do you have team responsibility for? Should you choose responsibility for others, or do you just move forward with your own personal liberties? And so he says this in verse 22, don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Like, if you're hungry, go eat at home. If you're so needing that glass of wine, then drink it at home. Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you for this? Certainly not. Because there would be those that would say, well, Paul, you should praise us. We had the agape feast. You had the agape feast without the poor. You had the agape feast without those that needed it. You had the agape feast just on your own merits. It was like, well, they take care of themselves. I take care of me. And this is about personal liberties and team responsibility. And he's saying, I cannot praise you for this. Now, once again, societal differences, going back to that verse about no doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. Those societal differences will show whether or not you can yield to the weaker, or you can yield to the one who has need. You can yield to the person that doesn't have. I've watched in church, for a long period of time, where people who have been in the church, and I might step on some toes here, you've been in the church for a long period of time, you have more knowledge about Christianity, and you have less grace for the newcomer. Well, I wish we had deeper teachings, and I wish we had deeper songs, and I wish we went back to what I like, not recognizing the body. Like, it is different. It's apples and oranges in some regards, and in some regards, it's the exact same thing. Like, you look around, and who needs the Lord? Who needs the body? Who needs the fellowship? Well, certainly the young. Certainly the person who is not quite discipled. Certainly the person that doesn't know. So it's like, okay, well, let's find out where the character is. Are you going to fight for, no, I want what I want. I want what I like. Or do I say, man, we have some people that are a part of our fellowship that really have need, and I want to make sure they get fed, and I want to make sure they get what they need. Paul had said when he said, don't you have a home to eat? Like, what you do in private, do it. But when it comes to public, make others the priority. So that clearly is what he's pushing on. So he says here, for I've received from the Lord what I've also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. When he'd given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He's going to go to the cup. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Now, just a couple more slides. He's talking about communion, and he's talking about we should evaluate. When we're dealing with the body of the Lord, and we're dealing with the one who we are under, there should be some evaluation. Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. A man ought to examine himself before he eats of the bread and drinks of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on himself. Pause here. It's not just about whether I have sinned. We should always examine ourselves. Lord, am I right? Lord, are there things in my life? But look at verse 29. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord. In just another chapter, he's going to start leaning into, in chapter 12, Paul is going to describe spiritual gifts, and he's going to say there's one body, and you're all part of that body. He's not just talking about the body on the cross and that was raised in victory. He's also talking about the body of the Lord. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord, you, me, everybody, like who's missing? Hey, wait. Everybody wait until everybody gets here. Let's wait and let's make sure that our weakest brother is able to participate. Let's wait and make sure that our weakest sister can participate. Let's wait and make sure that we've got good honor and we've got good order so that all can worship the Lord properly. If you don't do that, man, you'll have judgment on yourself. He says that is why many among you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. But if we judged ourselves, we would not come under judgment. Like, God is against taking his body, family, and jeopardizing them for your own personal liberties. He's not left personal liberty here. When we are judged by the Lord, we are being disciplined so that we will not be condemned by the world. There should be an order. So watch how he finishes. So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat agape feast, to share in the bread of the Lord, the cup of the Lord, wait for each other. Your gatherings should make sure that Christ is honored and that the body is able to participate. If anyone is hungry, eat at home, so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. When I come, I'll give you further directions. So this is the way I'd say it. Private, home, you be the focus. You be the priority of yourself. But when you're dealing with public gatherings of the body of Christ, it's about others. Others are to be considered. And it's not to say that we're not a part of the body, but don't stick your nose up. Don't stick your nose up and fight for, well, what I like and what I used to enjoy the most. And man, be about the body. Be about the body. And I'll just tell you that chapter 8 through 11 is team responsibility is always going to be better and preferred over personal liberty. Now, it's from that he's going to go into the next block, and that's 1 Corinthians 12, now about spiritual gifts, brothers. I don't want you to be ignorant. And what is he going to push on to in chapter 12? The illustration of a body. The work of the family of God is like a body. And he's going to talk about love, and he's going to talk about orderly worship in chapter 12, 13, and 14. I promise you, when he touches love, the famous love is patient, love is kind, he has not left the body. He has not left spiritual gifts. He has not just suddenly gone off onto personal liberty. He is going to maintain responsibility for the body as a whole. So with that said, I'm going to let you go. That finishes our study of 1 Corinthians 11. I hope this has been beneficial. Thanks for bearing with my voice and my coughs. Hopefully on our next one, I'll be a little better. And we will take 1 Corinthians chapter 12 in its totality, but I want you to know that it's linked to chapter 13 and 14, and it'll be a blessing for us. Hey, with that said, God bless you. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you at the next one.